Well, hello there, and welcome to what is possibly the weirdest year of all time, 2020. Now, I wanted to sit down and have a chat with you about the Oscars, and I know there is still a long time to the ceremony, a long time translated to 6 months, but I was so excited about it, especially because all the film festivals are either on their way or underway, so we're starting to get a clearer picture about who might be on the stage on that big day. Now, you might know that over the course of the years, I have developed a love-hate relationship towards the Oscar ceremony. In recent times, it's become anything except for the celebration of the highest achievements in filmmaking and more about everything that surrounds it. Now, some could argue that it is one of the biggest events of the whole year. It brings together our idols, we get to see them, we get to hear them voice their opinions. So of course the media cover all the political implications, the fashion choices, the gossip surrounding all the event. After all, it is an entertaining moment and people all around the world watch the ceremony even if they haven't seen all the films. And all of that was fine, while the films were still the main focus of the event. But recently this has shifted to the point that the films are becoming nearly marginalised compared to the gossip on the event. Because if you think of it as a business model, media moguls know that praising the cinematography of a foreign film which might be featured in a few select cinemas worldwide will not have the same cash-grabbing effect as what shoes a celebrity wear, what filter an influencer was using at the event. I think many film lovers like myself would love this process to revert, and the only way of doing this is by actually speaking about the films. And the Oscars ultimately are that one big event in which cinema as a form of art is, the loving of cinema as a form of art is spread to the whole world. All of that being said, every year when it comes to the Oscars, we will try to guess who might win. This usually happens a couple of months before the events, when the picture is rather clear, or even when the nominees have already been announced. So that means you only have to guess between 4 or 5 titles in each category. But in the unpredictability of this monstrous 2020, and with the film festivals already on the way, I decided to give an early look at what could actually be featured at the Oscars. The big problem with trying to predict the Oscars is that we don't usually manage to get to see all the films in time, especially in 2020. Cinemas are opened with limited screenings, if they're open at all, and it's not like we can just hop along to the film awards, which by the way are also running with a very limited capacity. And although you can get an idea, for example, Joker gave off very strong hints of a good production just with the first trailer, and then with the first mysterious reviews, it's not always a definitive answer. For example, Tenet was the most anticipated film of 2020, people were expecting it to be completely blown away, but upon its release, the impact it had on audiences was very different. In general, at the moment, there are a few big names that you will see recurring over the next months leading up to the Oscars, and there is also a big section of all this discourse relative only to Netflix. But you will definitely see how most of this year's titles don't receive the same emotional reaction as last year's, with Joker, Parasite, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Irishman. Even the so-called smaller titles such as Marriage Story and The Two Popes were still extensively spoken about months before the awards season, and many of them were already screened in cinemas at this point last year. This year, as I was mentioning earlier, we won't have crowds rushing to fill the cinemas because of the current events. Our only ray of hope is that the Oscars are very late in the year. They're at the end of April 2021, whereas usually they're towards February. So hopefully we will manage to get to see some of the content in time. But for now, let's try to patch together as much information as possible, and I will speak about the films more and more leading up to the event. Now, the one big title which has been circulating and which has all the right arrows pointed towards it is Nomadland, starring Frances McDormand. Now, Frances McDormand may not be your famous Natalie Portman or Meryl Streep, but she is a big name in the industry and a big name when it comes to awards. She's a terrific actress, she's starred in many popular films, and she's always been heavily featured at film awards seasons, with well over 100 nominations, of which she won at least half. Recently, we saw her win the Oscar for Best Actress in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, a fantastic film I would absolutely recommend. Now, all of that being said, Nomadland has only been seen by a very selected handful of people at a few film festivals. And this very small audience has rightly been keeping their mouth zipped quietly shut except for saying that it is absolutely beautiful. So of course all eyes appealed for Nomadland, even after just seeing this very brief trailer and knowing the information that Frances McDormand portrays a woman who chooses to live as a modern-day nomad after a town suffers the effects of an economic collapse. So in the world of excessive greediness, it's okay to be different and to tackle situations which are still present in current modern America, all with a breathtaking cinematography. We will hopefully supposedly get to see it around December. Now the one big thing of Nomadland is that it already won at the Venice Film Festival. Now that's not always a definitive indicator, but Cannes and Venice are two very big nudges in the right direction. If not pointed at the specific winner, at least at the biggest competitors. For reference, last year Parasite won at Cannes and Joker won at Venice. There was The Shape of Water, there was Roma. You see where this is heading. The other huge name is The Father, for which we have a lot of information and a pretty extensive trailer. Along with some famous names in the film industry such as Imogen Poots and Mark Gatiss, it features two humongous names when it comes to the highest achievements in filmmaking, and that is Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman, who in this film portray respectively an aging father who is dealing with memory loss and his daughter who is taking care of him. Already just from the trailer you can sense the power of their emotional performances, the weight of accepting the passing of time and the inevitability of aging and having to rely on others, wanting to be a strong father figure, the heartbreaking feeling of seeing your parents' weaknesses. I have a feeling this is a big one, and apparently at the moment, out of all the big names out there, this is the best reviewed one, especially in regards to Anthony Hopkins' performance, who really conveys this incredibly vast range of emotions, but without feeling too exaggeratedly put on for the camera. Another great film I'm excited to watch is Judas and the Black Messiah. Now, if you haven't seen the trailer for this, definitely go watch it. Already those 2-3 edited minutes really convey the power of this project. I personally have a really great feeling towards this movie. It covers the story of the Black Panther Party, which was an organization which used to fight for a series of rights and injustices, but in a manner which became rather dangerous. It involved a lot of nasty encounters between the members and the police, and as a matter of fact, this film covers one of the many FBI attempts to take the party down. I think this film's effect on audiences will rely a lot on high-stakes storytelling, the anxiety-fueled acting, so characters having to deal with pride and anger and suspicions, with the FBI playing cat and mouse. It also stars some pretty big names, so Daniel Kaluuya, Lakeith Stanfield, Jesse Plemons. I think this will be nominated for the acting or for the script, if it's released in time for the Oscars, because we still don't have a release date yet. Another possible huge contender is Mank, which will be released on Netflix and which is directed by David Fincher, the guy behind only 10 films, but which are all incredibly popular and which have gathered around 30 Oscar nominations. Seven, Fight Club, The Social Network, Gone Girl, Zodiac, Panic Room: The Game, as well as having worked on series like House of Cards, Mindhunter. These are all very different projects, but all with an engaging approach to the topic, and always with a curious look into our weird cogs in there. So of course, all eyes appealed for Mank, which covers the topic of all the legal implications surrounding the production of the movie Citizen Kane, a film which is often considered one of the best of all time. And as we are speaking of good acting, I suddenly realised that The Invisible Man could actually pop up at some time in regards to film awards. The Oscar ceremony usually strays very far away from horrors. Already when Get Out ended up at the Oscars, you could hear this symbolic grumbling in the background. But Elizabeth Moss was terrific in this film, as well as the film itself deserving more recognition. The Invisible Man focuses on the classic element of a mysterious invisible figure taunting others, in this case a terrified, abused partner, and I would love to see something like this in a nominee list. It would really start to actualise the acceptance that quality comes in a variety of genres. For example, when The Assistant was released earlier this year, people were raving about this drama, which looked perfect on the Oscar winners checklist. And then the film came out and people's jaws quickly closed again and expectations were shattered. But still, months later, we're talking about this film instead of The Invisible Man. We're still talking about the definitely not compelling, storytelling of a young woman and the abuse she suffered at her workplace, a concept which could have been developed in a definitely more powerful manner, underlining the seriousness of the themes. But anyway, I would like to then mention another hugely featured film when it comes to the upcoming Oscars, and that is Ammonite. This film is inspired by the real-life love story between a geologist and a young woman she takes under her wing. I haven't seen this film yet. It should be released later on this year. It's only been seen by a handful of people at film festivals. But from what we hear, critics are raging about this film, about the cinematography, about the acting, and about the storytelling, which reaches beyond the usual depiction of an 1800s romance. As a matter of fact, one element that caught my attention with the trailers is how this film could be set in present time and the story would kind of still work. It never feels like a dreary period drama. I think most of the potential Oscar nominees I've seen up until now are the Netflix releases. The first big name is Da 5 Bloods, directed by Spike Lee, which covers the story of a group of Vietnam War veterans who returned to Vietnam many years later to complete some unfinished business. Now, last year, the director's previous film, BlacKkKlansman, was a huge buzz at the Oscars, and I'm sure it will return trending as it features John David Washington before he was in Tenet. And I can see why it was so heavily featured at the Film Awards season. It was a really great film, but I never felt the same with Da 5 Bloods. Sure, it has a great soundtrack, storytelling, it digs deep into the characters' personalities, but there was always something missing. I don't know, I just felt like I was waiting for the end of the film to arrive. Now, that of course doesn't mean anything because number one, personal taste doesn't mean that a film isn't good, and number two, the Oscars aren't going to change because of my opinion. If I really have to say it, I'm beyond surprised by the fact that Spike Lee's previous film, right before BlacKkKlansman, which was Chirac, was barely even nominated at Film Awards, let alone win, whereas I found it incredible. So I would love to hear what you thought about Da 5 Bloods, if you have any inputs to give me. Now, Da 5 Bloods is one of the handful of Netflix films which could actually make it all the way to the Oscars. As a matter of fact, this year's novelty is that online films can be nominated. Because otherwise, if the lockdown hadn't ended in a lot of countries, it would still be Sonic the Hedgehog versus Bad Boys for Life. Now, you might have already seen some Netflix films at the Oscar ceremonies in the past, but they always have a cinema release, a theatrical release, either before the online release or during, at the same time of the online release. Now, obviously, this year, Netflix execs have been rubbing their hands together, and along with producing a ton of cheesy content to fill in our long, endless quarantine days, they have given us quite a lot of good content, most of it quite recently. The two films which aren't spoken about that much, but which I think they will make their ways into some categories, are The Devil All the Time and I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Now, out of the two, I'm Thinking of Ending Things is more oriented towards the Academy voters' mindset. It has well thought out dialogues and metaphoric storytelling, deep, meaningful acting. To give you more context, imagine the dialogues of The Room and then imagine the complete opposite of that.
It's not over. Everybody betrayed me. I'm fed up with this world.
Basically, in this film, a couple travel all the way out of the city by car in a snowstorm to visit the in-laws, and the whole car journey is an endless, engrossing, interesting, but also anxiety-fueling, passive-aggressive exchange between the two lovers. And when they reach the in-laws' house, the situation there is a huge, mysterious metaphor which only really makes sense when you watch it. Or maybe even after that it still remains a mystery. Anyway, long story short, it's the kind of storytelling and acting the Academy loves. And up until now, I haven't actually heard anybody say anything particularly bad about this film, except that it is complicated and weird. And is that ultimately a bad thing? The other great Netflix film is The Devil All the Time, which is less likely to be cashing in all the awards, but which I found incredibly and unexpectedly good. This is one of those films which remind you just how far Netflix has come from its old original content. It's set in 60s rural America in an environment heavily influenced by faith and not always in the right way. Now, the promotional material regarding this film is very vague about the story, to save it for the best viewing experience, so I'm not going to start dishing out all the info. But I think this could be an interesting choice when it comes down to acting. Robert Pattinson and Tom Holland had incredibly compelling characters. And now that I think of it, Tom Holland is actually in another great film which is supposed to be released sometime in 2021 called Cherry, and apparently everybody's raving about this film, but unfortunately I don't know much about it. I don't even think a trailer's out. I haven't seen anything, but we have to keep our eyes out for that one. And now let's tackle Tenet. As a huge Nolan fan, I'm telling you that Tenet is highly unlikely to win anything beyond the technical categories, and there's nothing degrading about that. I'm a person who has always argued that a film wouldn't be the same without all the basically anonymous technicians with their lights and their props and the audio and their skills. But it's always the director that we remember, isn't it? Well, 2020 looks like the year in which Christopher Nolan would have risen above the ashes of the crumbling film industry with his only film, with the competitors being Fantasy Island and 365 Days, and be crowned with his long-awaited prize. But then the film industry returned with new releases, new good releases. Tenet came out and audience expectations were shattered. If you want a complete review of Tenet, I will leave the link to that video, to my standalone review of the film. But if the Academy didn't start throwing awards at Inception and Interstellar, they're probably not going to start doing it now. The other huge science fiction film of the year is Dune, which I am still reading on my Kindle. I'm desperately trying to read it in time for the film's release, but with my work schedule, I don't think that will be feasible. So unfortunately, my knowledge on the topic is rather limited. I can't get all hyped up about it, and I seriously feel that any comment on the trailer will lose all the lack of information on my behalf. I really don't want to sit here pretending I'm all knowledgeable when every other night I'm scratching my head in front of the Kindle trying to figure out how to pronounce some of the terms. But as I know a lot of you are fans of Dune, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Then instead we have Mulan, which I will include here as it is one of the most covered films recently, and because a lot of people are saying it could be nominated in the makeup and hairstyling and costumes categories. But Mulan is a very questionable nominee. Because the Oscars tend to get political, whether we like it or not, the choice is influenced by much more than just the final product. And Mulan has been heavily criticised. Not only from a simple marketing point of view, because it was released on Disney Plus, a streaming platform which you already have to pay for and which is supposed to include every Disney product, but Mulan comes at an additional $20–30. Now that already sparked some controversy. People were discussing, some people said that after all, accounts are always shared, so the total cost would be less than what you would actually pay at the cinemas for a family. Others were completely outraged by it. But all of that set apart, there was a lot of criticism because apparently, allegedly, Mulan was filmed in an area of China where there are concentration camps. Now, in this current situation of the film industry, I highly doubt the Academy is going to go out there and risk it all by putting itself in a controversial position of awarding something, if you see what I mean. It is more likely that a film like, I don't know, Birds of Prey could win for that category. Then there are still a few topics out there to talk about. A24 released a trailer for their latest film, Minari, just a couple of days ago, and it had people bawling their eyes out, it had people applauding it. It's a very emotion-fueled story of a Korean family who moves to the United States and all their struggles of creating a new life there. Apparently, the lucky ones who saw it said it just left them completely in tears. Then Billie Eilish is making her way into film soundtracks. She's on the new Bond film, No Time to Die, which nobody understands when it will be released, if it could make it in time for the Oscars. Then there are a couple of other films, such as One Night in Miami and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but for which I still need to do a bit of research. So we will be definitely chatting more about the whole topic in these months leading up to the Oscars. But I would love for now to hear all your opinions on the topic. Make sure to leave a comment down below, let me know who you think will win, all of your thoughts. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you can see more. See you soon in the next one. Bye.